Well. Look who decided to show up and play some basketball. Friends, preseason game number 3 for the Brooklyn Nets is in the books, and we finally got the sample size that probably Sean Marks, Steve Nash, and the entire Nets organization thought we would see when they made that trade for Ben Simmons with Kevin Durant, with Kyrie Irving. We break down a sensational sample size coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo.
Yes, sir. It is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie. He's the owner-operator of DFSR for all your daily fantasy sports rankings from DraftKings to FanDuel. He's got you covered. I am Adam Arbert, breaking down the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast with my boy, Andy Mack. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day, free on all those great platforms and live on YouTube. And Doug, we're having ourselves a good one tonight because preseason game number 3 finally showed us what we thought we knew, and just needed to see it so we knew what we knew. Ben Simmons, Kevin Durant, and Kyrie Irving can be a really potent combination for this team.
This was it. This was the promise of trading for Ben Simmons when you trade Harden last year. At least what you see on the court. I know this is a preseason game. The minutes that they played tonight were part of what we've been sort of dreaming on, what the team could look like if it was firing on all cylinders, if the things were kind of coalescing in a way that you thought on the court that they could. We have not seen it yet, and we saw it tonight, and we saw it for a long stretch of time. Like, it was not, and there's room to grow here for sure, but tonight against the Bucks, against an essentially full-strength Bucks team except for Middleton, and then in Connaughton too, but you know, Giannis is there, Lopez is there, Drew's there. This was exactly what you started to picture when you heard that Simmons was coming for Harden. And we're going to talk about what we mean on like a sort of a granular level and a high level. But just to start, yeah, like we were buzzing the whole game. I'm like, this was it. This is exactly what we thought could happen if we could finally see it kind of start to play out on the court. And it was just awesome to see. Like, my opinion of the team is not so changed, except that it's just like, okay, great, we saw it. It exists. Yeah. This version of the team exists. We can see it, and now we can start going from here about what the team can really look like, because they really put it together tonight against the Bucks.
Yeah, I think to your point, we kept saying this on paper. This team can be. And then some of these guys in these roles, which we'll get to behind the superstars, but seeing it for the first 4 minutes and then the first 8 minutes and then the first 12 minutes, I think that really mattered too, because it's not just in the first 2 games where we're trying to say seeds for success. Here's a little instance. There's a little opportunity. No Kyrie Irving in the second game, as we know, but then you do this with no Joe Harris out there, no Seth Curry out there, and you still put on display what is the most important 3 pieces, those superstars, and Ben Simmons being at the focal point of how things were working, of how fluid things started to look. And specifically with him, as we start to dive in a little bit deeper here, night and day, just in terms of like saying, like, he just doesn't look comfortable on offense yet. We may have to look into the regular season, a handful of games. And by the way, they could play on the final preseason game, or they could play in the first regular season game, and you could still look clunky at times. But tonight you just saw sustained execution of what they want to do. And man, as buzzing as I have been since that time when it was James Harden, Kyrie Irving, and Kevin Durant going, oh my God, imagine what this team can accomplish.
And the reason this, and we're going to get to all like the reasons here shortly, right? Because there's a lot of examples I want to give. I know you want to give. The reason this is not an overreaction to a preseason game, there's a couple reasons that, like, you know, being excited about having seen this is one. Remember, we haven't seen it yet. Like, Simmons didn't play last year. We know everything that happened last year. We've been waiting. The first 2 games of the preseason, like you said, had glimpses of it. Right. There was moments where, like, okay, I can sort of see it here. Right. I can see them out in transition here. I can see them sort of hounding on defense. I can see them, like, how the DHO stuff is going to work with Katie and Kyrie, and like they're playing this 3-man game. but then it would go away. Right. Like then it would stop, but
Yeah.
then it would stop, or like you said, Kyrie wasn't there, or just like, the intensity wasn't there. They treated this game like a regular season game right from the jump. They sustained it for the first, because we were joking about it online. We're like, okay, they sustained it for 4 minutes, then 8 minutes, then 12, then 24. And Royce hits the half quarter, right? To kind of be like, right, this is exactly how
Chef's
it's going
kiss.
tonight. Right. Yeah. This is how it's going for the team tonight. And they just never let down. And I think they could feel it. I think this is the first time that you saw this. This was the first time that you saw this team start to believe, right? Like he's, the Neo piece where he's like, oh, he's beginning to believe. They started to believe. You could see it. They're like, yes, we're going to start to believe that this can actually look good together. And once they started to believe, they actually just didn't want to stop, right? Like they kept on at both ends of the court. Intensity, like a regular season game. They wanted to win. They knew who they were playing. It was chippy, for sure. They knew what they wanted to do. And once I think they started to see how Simmons was helping them put it together, they saw the pace that they wanted to play. They saw the different actions that were just working time and time again and more. It just actually put fuel in the fire to make them kind of continue it. And I want to talk about Simmons. I know we talk about Durant. We want to talk about Kyrie, but does that make sense? Like, they needed this game. They needed this game specifically going into the regular season because now there's something to draw on. Yes, it's a preseason game, but now you have this is such a building block.
So I'm gonna point to two things here before we get into specifics with the players and how they were productive. They were showing some clips, some interviews with everybody. Great piece before the game on Ben Simmons and getting involved in the community, like all good stuff. There's one piece where Kyrie Irving is talking about how, he's like, honestly, it feels like a lot of people are doubting that Ben Simmons is still the player that he was, or that people have somehow forgotten. And he used the great lines like, keep that energy. He's like, we're really excited for that because we see what's happening at practice. And when it starts to translate to the court, it's going to be something really special. So I think you already had this sense of the belief. The other one, it's a tip of the cap to Giannis because they showed a clip of him with an interview over the summer with Frank Iasola. And he was talking about his game and how, your skill. And Giannis almost cut him off. And he was like, it's not about my skill. He mentioned all the highest level. He goes, LeBron playing for 20 years, consistency, dedication to getting better, to the little things, to the grind. He talked about MJ, right? The obsession of it. And we talked about himself. He's like, I'm not the best. He's like, I'm not the best shooter. I'm not the best whatever. He goes, I do think my passing is underrated. He gives himself a nod. But most of it, he's like, it's about the grind and the consistency. And I go back to when we were talking about saying toughness or what is this thing they're talking about? That might be the biggest piece of it. And a little bit of the payoff we saw tonight was the consistency of probably what's happening every single day in practice when these guys are trying to work on their rhythm and their chemistry together. Here's the payoff for the grind and the little things. And now it's just about carrying it over. But you needed this. You 100% needed to see this. We needed to. They needed to in a real game action, albeit preseason. Now they get to carry that forward. And no, if we had a lump, guess what? We saw we can do it. We know we can get back to it.
And basketball is such a fluid game that you need to understand players need to understand each other on a multiple, sort of different levels to be able to just have an understanding of movement, pace, spacing, all that stuff. The first couple games, it was clunky and it got bogged down. And we talked about needing to see sort of consistent movement, consistent spacing, things like that. And for it to sustain, but when you start to see that actually happening and put into practice, then you now this is the part where you start dreaming on the upside too. It's like, oh man, there's actually room to grow here. They did actually a bunch of things wrong and still looked really good. And so, yeah, when you mentioned that thing about Giannis, about those little things, this again is I just go back to what I said before. It's just a building block kind of experience, right? Hey, if we've seen it in practice, but it didn't get put into practice into games on a consistent level yet. Again, it's only been 2 games before this one and one without Kyrie. But we've heard that from this group too. It's we see what's happening in practice. Simmons had said it in his media game day. It's how does it look? He's amazing, right? This is actually the first glimpse of I think what they were talking about during those things, right? It was yeah, it looks amazing. Yeah, it really, really does. And Simmons, I want to talk about Simmons specifically here after the break because we could have done 30 minutes just on him. I think pretty easily. And it's funny too because KD had an amazing game. Kyrie had an awesome game. Claxton was busted it out of the box with an amazing game. This was a full team effort. We're going to talk about that in a second. Appreciate everyone that was over there and live on YouTube as well. We're going to be doing live on YouTube after every game this season. So everyone that's in there on YouTube, we see you all for sure. Really, really appreciate it. Also going to talk to you about our friends over at betonline.net, your number one source for football betting info this season, basketball betting as well. BetOnline has not updated anything after this Nets preseason game with the championship odds plus 700. It's got, let's go even odds on the Nets at this point. Did they even watch the game? The people at BetOnline, are they asleep at the wheel? Go find out for yourself. BetOnline.net. Latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, in-depth articles, and analysis on every game you can find. BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sports wagering information, live betting, up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there, not just football, not just basketball. MLB if you're rolling through the playoffs, MMA on the weekends, golf as well. BetOnline.net. You can sign up there on your mobile device. You learn about all the different trends, all the different action. BetOnline, where the game starts.
And where we start, Doug, to talk about these big three players. As you mentioned, everybody had great games all the way down to Yuta Watanabe. But we'll get there. We'll get there. No, we'll get there. I'm going to be fine. I'm going to keep it together. But at the highest possible level, the guy with the biggest level of mystery was Ben Simmons. Again, night and day from preseason game number 2, specifically on the offensive end. We'll get to the defensive side of things. But I think the execution, there's a specific sequence very early in this one that I want to mention with him and Kyrie Irving. But what did you like about what he accomplished in this game, especially compared to where he was in the first 2 preseason games? I thought he was obviously better around the basket, better with the floater, those type of things. But drilling down on a little bit of a deeper detail.
Yeah, so he was so confident, right? Like he was so confident in this game about where he wanted to kind of go with the basketball. We talked about the dribble getting picked up. It didn't happen once this game. Like they knew it, sort of what actions they wanted to get into, even actions that were busted. There still wasn't any stagnation. They found every mismatch, and Simmons specifically. Because you'll be able to find Kyrie and KD mismatches all game long if you work hard enough. Like you can work yourself into those all game. They did that a lot this game, right? Like they worked into ISOs. But Simmons specifically on the offensive end, it was clear they're like, we're going to run DHO stuff as much as possible. He's an excellent dribble handoffs and then screener, because he's able to stop, in motion, come up with the dribble handoff and set the alternate screen to be able to get his.
So I'm only going to interject because that was the play. It was he goes up to the top of the key as Kyrie Irving's curling around. He sets the screen for himself. He's the screener for Kyrie and also the primary ball handler, and then has the passing ability to find Kyrie in his spot. It was one of those moments where you go, oh, so we can go ahead and save ourselves a body on a lot of plays like this too, because he's big enough and he's physical enough. Keep going, because that's the flow that it's in. But that just jumped out to me so early because that was in the first 4 minutes of this game.
And it's such a threat too, because if you try to come over that, he'll just go to the rim, right? So that's one thing. And then 2, along with that, he was much more comfortable wanting to go to the basket tonight, right? Like not necessarily looking for contact, but not shying away from it. He was able to get into the lane. He had a couple nice floaters. He went to the line a few times, can't make the free throws, but whatever. It was able to make the defense have to decide between him and Claxton a few times, which is going to be real trouble because once I get, where Simmons can shoot from the outside, but once he's in the lane, it's really problematic for defenses, especially if he's there with Claxton, because you just have 2 huge bodies. He looked very confident in those actions as well. Like that was the one thing. We had seen pieces of it with his sort of around the perimeter and how he wants to move as the dribble handoff guy, as the screener, as a screener in those actions. But this was like, hey, I'm also going to try to get to the basket. And if that's going to be, and you saw what happens, right? Like he's able to short roll his way and make really, really awesome reads. He found Claxton once. He found corner shooters. He went to the basket himself. If that's all going to be on the table for him, the Nets offense is going to be awesome. Like if all 3 outcomes are on the table, lob, finish, kick out, like from Simmons, who's 6'10", 6'11", the Nets, that's going to be really, really difficult to stop. And we finally saw glimpses of it.
Yeah, and I really thought that watching this game again, contrasting to what we had seen prior. So What I really liked about it was one of the things I'd seen previously and thought, well, this action where Claxton ends up in the lane, I don't understand what the process is supposed to be here. And then Ben's picking up his dribble. Here, Claxton staying just outside of the paint and allowing Ben, to your point, to get himself into his spot and then make his choice about where he's going to go with that action. We always love stats when they favor our point. The idea that he went 28 minutes, gave you 7 points, 8 rebounds, and 10 assists. Again, speaking to that idea of someone that needs to take on the point forward facilitator role, that's fully in his bag here. And I just, that Claxton piece and the way that he played off of him on the offensive end, that's going to be critical here. We also know that we didn't, no Seth Curry, no Joe Harris, even though Royce O'Neal is in that starting lineup and he's capable of playing from the outside. Big difference. And we talked about this last episode about what those two players are. And I think actually the skill sets around him in the two complementary pieces after the stars also greatly benefit from having Ben Simmons being on the floor. So the backdoor cuts, the lane options that he brings getting into the paint was really important, I thought, early in this one.
And one more thing, and they called this out on the broadcast, and it was either Doris Burke or whoever she was doing it with. I wasn't paying attention, but they mentioned that they ran a horns action, and this is true. Like they ran a horns, and horns is when it's usually when you have a primary ball handler, and then you have two bigs that come up as like sort of screen setters in the middle of the floor, and then you break off actions from it. Usually that's with bigs. And someone can correct me if I'm wrong on all the X's and O's on this, but I'm like pretty sure I'm right. Usually you don't do it, but they ran it with a Kyrie and KD as the middle screen setters and Simmons at the top of the key. When they break out of that action, that is going to be, it's such a problem for defenses because those other two guys can create mismatches. If you cross screen that way and then get those guys into, like, get Kyrie with a big on him or KD with a smaller guard on him, which they did a lot, or with the threat that Simmons could just get it all the way downhill if like things really get crossed up. That's just that's another like interesting concept. And I know people are always like, hey, Nash doesn't coach, but like they ran tons of actions tonight. Like they just did.
No, you bring up a great point. Again, things that jump out to you because they look different than what you're familiar with. Seeing Kyrie and Kevin Durant involved in those actions where you can envision, okay, with Joe Harris out there, with a Seth Curry out there, as they are crossing through the lane and going out to their respective corners, you mentioned opens up the paint. Yeah, that's one phase of it. But also it's now creating, well, our two best players are going to be in active motion. Our spot up shooters are going to wait for opportunities, and Ben Simmons is going to wait, and we feel like we're trusting him now to make the right decision, right? To take advantage of whichever matchup is going to be the most beneficial. And one thing that we saw even through the clunkiness of the first two preseason games was those little glimpses of Ben Simmons' court vision, his aptitude, his understanding of where the ball should go, even if they were being disjointed, getting broken up by defense, whatever. Tonight, that fluidity was there. And you brought that up. Again, something I do not remember seeing 6% of the time all of last season, and something I would anticipate seeing a lot of going into this year.
And it's just a different set of personnel, right? Like they can run this when you have a guy that's going to be able, if he can get downhill and if he has the vision to also be able to make cross-court passes over defenders, which he's able to do, you just have a range of outcomes more than the Nets have had in the past. Like they just have more things that they can run, different than if it's like Goran Dragic bringing the ball up or something like that, right? Like, which was, I mean, and they had a whole different set of packages.
By the way, or Patty Mills having the ball in his hands, or anybody else, like it's just different. You cannot ask, or even even James Harden. And by the way, that's effective in its own whole different right if you had him running the point for this team. But it's different, and this is a different dynamic that you're introducing for Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. And it looks like this is the sample size to say it can be very dangerous on a consistent basis. And you mentioned Steve Nash, and we're not going to talk about him a lot in this one. We'll come back in next week and talk about it. He's got a long way to go to prove things, but this would also be the sample of, Steve Nash at least has some idea of what basketball is and how to run and execute it. And you're starting to maybe see him get to implement his version of what he thinks this team can look like.
Yeah, for sure. Like there were some fingerprints on this, right? Like they pushed the pace. This is the other thing too, which we haven't talked. They pushed the pace a ton this game. I want to, and when we come back we're going to take a quick break here in a sec, but we got to talk about the defense. This has been a lot of the offensive stuff, but the defense was another thing. But leading into that, just to make mention of the pace that they played with here, they pushed the pace every time they forced a turnover, which they were able to do. They pushed it. I think for most of the game, they might have ended it. Not, but let me just check real quick. At one point, they were just out rebounding. They were out rebounding the Bucks, and the Bucks overtook them like in the last 4 minutes when they kept their starters in, and the Nets brought their bench.
Bunch of
But at one
tinies and
point,
Day'Ron Sharp.
with 5 minutes left, when they checked everyone out, the Nets were out rebounding the Bucks and were tied on the offensive glass too, which is like I could have cried because I couldn't even think. I just can't even remember the last time they did that. But they pushed the pace off of turnovers, they pushed the pace off misses, and they pushed the pace off makes. Mm-hmm. And that's the other thing that we talked about a little bit about in previous episodes. That if they're pushing the pace in all the obvious ways, and that's going to be awesome for them most times. But they're pushing the pace off when the other team makes the basket too, and that applies such pressure on the opposing defense. If you are going to be up against Ben Simmons, Kyrie Irving, and KD, and they're going to be flying up the court after you make a shot, like that is just, the foot never gets taken off the gas. I love to see that. I love it. Keep an eye on that for like these other games. When you see the other team makes it and there's just a quick outlet to Simmons and they're already trying to get into a cross match or just trying to get you on your back heel, because that's just going to be another thing that they can really apply pressure to the opposing defenses.
Yep. And in 1 second here, we're going to dive in on that defensive side of the ball, some of the effectiveness. And I think the other guy in this starting five, Nicholas Claxton, who started to really find his rhythm on both ends of the floor, along with Ben Simmons, and really showcase what he maybe is looking to accomplish in the next phase of his game. All right. So, Nicholas Claxton, my friends, and we can, we could go over stat lines all day long. But the visual, again, same thing with the Ben Simmons setting the act, being the screener and ball handler for Kyrie Irving. There was a sequence when Giannis is down low underneath the basket, and Nicholas Claxton and Ben Simmons are in the paint using their length, and they're just in the way. They're disruptive. They're making it difficult for Giannis to get the ball up at the rim. And this was the first time, too, where I thought there's a lot of different things I like here, including that transition game you're talking about. But this was the first instance where I thought, why do the Nets why have we not heard rumors about what are they going to do? Who are they going to sign? Where are they going to go for the bigs? This was the first example of when you're long enough and you're strong enough, you can apply pressure on the defensive end in ways that looks different than just saying, put your body against them and don't let them back you down to the paint, right? This was just two defenders who are smart, who has shown Nicholas Claxton the capabilities of defending without being the more physical presence. I thought that they showed a really good tandem there, to say nothing of what happened away from those instances when we're talking about some of the switching opportunities and just using their length, and communication on the defensive end looked a lot cleaner and crisper in tonight's game as well.
They were so dialed in. And I think it started. So a couple things that are key here. One, in the old list of things that have not happened in a while, they won the turnover battle by a ton, 22-14. Like they were just losing the turnover battle all the time last season. That was just not the case. They, 50% more turnovers from the Bucks in this one as a direct result of the pressure that they were putting on. Simmons did not just guarded the hardest guy in basketball to guard in Giannis. Yep. Like Giannis is the hardest defensive matchup you can get in basketball. That's just the truth. Like he just on a one-on-one basis, just because how big and athletic and just freakish he is. Simmons showed you already in a preseason game that he is up to the task as more than just the speed bump. Usually you're just hoping to speed bump Giannis. That was not the case. Putting both of those guys into make sure that Giannis found that getting to the rim was super hard. Yeah, they fouled him a lot. That's fine. Like that's just going to happen. Everyone fouls Giannis a lot. But having those two guys combine to really, really give him a lot of just trouble in and around the paint. And I think there was a few times where they got called for fouls that just looked like good defense to me. It was close, but they were so up to the task on him that was another thing that just kind of just trickled down to the rest of the team. You could see it as like, oh, hey, we have a guy on our team now who actually can guard the other team's best guys. Like he can guard the other team's best guys. He got switched on the Drew a couple times. That it was totally up for the task there. Like I said, 75% of Giannis possessions when they were both in the game, Simmons was on him. Like that's such a hard task to be dealt with. And Simmons was so up for it. And you could just see what happened to the rest of the team. They forced steals. They jumped into passing lanes. They made it really problematic when he got near the basket. Yeah, they got some open threes. That'll happen when you're going to be a super aggressive defense. That just is what it is. I thought the defensive pressure was awesome. Like it was just. I mean, are you with me on that? Like, I think you are, right? I mean,
no,
just,
I mean
it was.
it feeds. You just said it feeds off of it, and we talked about this in the off season before these preseason games kicked off. How the trickle down effect of Ben Simmons being on the floor means, well, now Nicholas Claxton gets to take on the second most difficult assignment, or is capable of switching. Kevin Durant now gets bumped down to the third most difficult assignment defensively, if you so choose, and that makes the lift a little bit lighter for him on that end of the floor, and then helps you on the offensive end of the floor as well. It's definitely worth noting that you have 3 steals in this game. From Kevin Durant. You have 3 steals for Nicholas Claxton, along with his 3 blocks as well. Guess what? Those are not solely on the efforts of Nicholas Claxton and Kevin Durant alone. It's about the pressure that Ben Simmons can apply to his matchup that then makes them want to find the outlet, and now you have these active, lengthy hands. Those 2 guys specifically, their length matters when you're thinking about Ben Simmons playing back into the lane defensively, and those 2 guys stepping out towards the perimeter, clogging up those passing lanes. So that was a really big benefit there. Royce O'Neal had a couple as well, hit 2 blocks in this game to go along with it. Everything is this secondary byproduct of the intensity that you bring, and Ben Simmons is a guy who wants that. There are guys that are good defenders that like to do it, right? And honestly, on the other side of the court, there's a good example of it. Drew Holiday is a guy that wants to be known as a defensive stopper at his position. He wants the tough matchups. Other guys can be good defensively. Kevin Durant is a good defender. Sometimes he can be a great defender. He doesn't want that to be his hallmark. He does his work on the offensive end. The fact that Ben Simmons, I think, can actually play games like this night in and night out and walk off the court elated at his performance, that's what you need to start to have that effect really take over for this team.
Oh, for sure. I was going to say the same thing. I was going to say he wanted it. Like he wanted that matchup. It's like he knows he's going into that game having to guard Giannis. Like that's just going to be the assignment. That's going to be his assignment in a lot of these games. And it's not going to be all Giannis types, right? Like he's going to probably see some Harden during the year. Like he's going to see these other guys. He's going to see Tatum, like all these different sort of archetypes of players that Simmons is just equipped to guard, because that's just the kind of player that he is. And like you said, he wants to be able to do it. And when you know you have a guy in your team that wants that assignment, you can be energized at the other end by knowing that you're going to get like that kind of effort against the other team's best player. And then what you can do on the defensive end is only going to shine because of that, right? Like, and the Nets, again, just didn't have that last year. It was, partly was just because they just didn't have it, right? Sometimes when you have Harden, you don't need it. But like, think about too, like,
no, but it's not. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, real quick, just in the best versions of the Nets, and a player that they really missed last year a lot was Jeff Green, right? Mm-hmm. Like they missed Jeff Green for this very reason. Jeff Green's not Ben Simmons, but Jeff Green could handle defensive assignments to take the load off of some of these other guys, especially on the wings. And like they just didn't even have that guy last year. So it was like they were missing something really needed on the offensive end. And they were also missing a different kind of guy on the defensive end. Simmons just happens to be possibly both guys, but on both ends. And this is why you traded for him. So the defensive effort was just such an A+. Even like to the casual fan, like you can see that, you could see it, right? Like you could see the defensive thing. They didn't do a ton of switching in this game. It'll be interesting to see like if that's something that comes along a lot more as the season goes on, about whether or not they want to like just really switch a lot. If they want to fight over things, they just weren't interested in switching. But Simmons just, I think that a lot of that started with him too, and Claxton too, like both of those guys together.
And I don't mind the idea of this team defensively kind of working soft zones defensively and then making your decisions about where your assignment's going, which can end up being pseudo switches, but rather than it looking just strictly passing it off, more, hey, I can fight over the top, and then we can have 2 sagging, lengthy bodies that make the choice about where they're going to go. That was the last thing I was going to say, just off your point about going back to, without Jeff Green, but that other iteration of this team. We were always dreaming on just burying people, right? Just burying you in the offensive waves that were going to crash down upon you. The difference with Ben Simmons now is that you can think about this team in a way that's balanced, that can bury you on either end of the floor. And that's important depending on matchup to matchup. There were games where you looked at the offense and you said, guess what? If we can just go ahead and outscore you, you can't catch back up with us. But go back to, remember that Cleveland game? Remember that Cavs where we thought we just got to get in here, just got to beat these guys, and they nearly stormed back? It's because you didn't have the ability to step onto the court defensively and say, no, we're going to stop you there. There's a lot more when it comes to the Nicholas Claxton, Ben Simmons, a tandem that I think really worked well on both ends of the floor that we'll get back into probably on our Friday episode. Short of saying, though, it was also a really good sample size that says, yes, this can be your starting unit with Royce O'Neal, with Joe Harris, with player number 5, whoever it may be, and it can work really effectively.
Yeah, for sure. Like there's a lot more to talk about here. I'm going to go back and watch. I think we'll both probably just go back and watch some of the sequences from this game. I think it's worth it. Again, just as a reminder to any, yes, it's a preseason game, but the Nets did not treat it as such, and neither did the Bucks. Like a lot of teams
have not been treating these preseason, like certain games, the intensity picks up at the right moment early on, and everyone buys in. It doesn't matter when we're playing. For sure, the Bucks have played a ton of preseason games. Their starters have not played a lot of them. Like they've been on this weird trip. They went to Dubai. This is like their 5th preseason game. The Nets have played 3. It's just a weird. It was a back-to-back for them. It's a weird situation. But this was a game where they did want to put most of their best foot forward. It did not have. If you watch the game, it just didn't have a feel of a preseason game. At least when the core group, even down to the end, like when they brought the young guys when they hit the court, and kept in the. I don't know if the Bucks wanted to pick me up or whatever to keep the starters in against, and they still didn't work. So I was happy to see that. Yeah. But there's preseason games, and then there's like preseason or regular season light. I would call it like that. Like it's like a regular season light game. I think this was more than a preseason game, clearly less than a regular season game because it doesn't count in the win-loss column. But if in terms of like getting takeaways for things you needed to see before this first game against New Orleans, like this symbolic.
Yeah, for sure. Okay.
Symbolic.
Appreciate that everyone that jumped in here to the live YouTube. We're actually going to stick in here. We're going to close the regular show off here, and then we're going to stick into YouTube live. We'll if people want to throw in some questions, we'll try to answer some questions here. So like the regular version of the podcast, we'll stop here in a second, the way we usually close it out. And then we'll close it out like sort of traditionally, and then we'll stay in for the YouTube live and try to answer some questions as well. Make sure if you're listening to this or seeing this on YouTube for the first time, please subscribe to YouTube. Have jumped so many people onto being subscribers. It's just awesome. Hundreds of people in here tonight on this on this one, so really appreciate it. Make sure you do that. Make sure you follow the podcast, Spotify, iTunes, wherever. All those ways are super or completely free, and they are huge helps to us too. So like and subscribe on YouTube, like and subscribe wherever you listen to the podcasts.
Super and completely free. Listen, after a game like this, when it all seems like it's coming together, you know what we're not going to hear? Nick doesn't have a life plan. He doesn't even have a day plan. I once found a note that he wrote to himself that said, "Put on pants." That's Jessica Day from New Girl.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets. We will be back
really
again.
She really is. Learned a lot about myself watching that show.
Gonna have to take your word for it on that one. We will be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
I did. Now that we're in, this is the post show, guys. Welcome backstage. This is where I take a look at the note that says "Take off pants, relax." It's the post game show, post pod show. We're gonna keep it rolling here. I'm gonna just remind Doug to shut down his audio recording so we get that all cleaned up on the back end. But now we get to say hey to everybody in the chat. Obviously, we see we had up over 200 at one point. We have 180 people rolling around in this thing. Throw out your comments. We're assuming that everyone is feeling really good about it. We see a lot of familiar names in there, like Gerard, like Claude, like AT. We got a lot of our familiar faces that have been rolling through here. Do we have the same general sentiment? I guess is a good question to throw out to the crowd, as well as throwing them back at us. Is everyone willing to take this third preseason game and say, yes, that's what we needed to see, and we feel comfortable? Because I'll say to you, Doug, as people fire in some questions, Christian Winfield was saying over, and I'm not calling him out. He had said that Frank Iasola was saying, yeah, shut everybody down for the final preseason game. You don't need to worry about it. Christian pushed back on that a little bit, saying, hey, you need the reps for these guys. I get the reps part, but when you have a game like this, I kind of go, this is about as good as a vibe as you could possibly have going into the regular season. I think practices are fine the rest of the way. I don't know if you're going to build anything new on Friday night.
Yeah, I think I'm in. Let's just get into the regular season healthy mode here after seeing this game. If this game had gone off the rails or had been sort of lackadaisical in a way that the other ones had been, I probably would have a different thought process here. I thought they looked as close to game speed as you're probably going to get for a group that hasn't played a ton together. Has played almost no minutes together. And so I think for me, just with some of these injuries that are cropping up, like Zion, he's got foot or ankle soreness. We just saw LaMelo get hurt, like Marvin Bagley just got hurt. Injuries can happen, whatever. You can't predict them and you can't prevent them really. But at this point, after this game, I would just say, let's take the next game. I was in Minnesota. Let's just take the game off. It's fine. See who's going to break camp, who's going to get some of this guaranteed money and move on, right? Are you with that? It seems pretty clear to me.
Because by the way, here's another great thing from the sample size. Nobody got hurt. They played this entire game. Everyone looked great together, and everyone is healthy. I agree with that sentiment. There was a question talking about, and this isn't really anything, not necessarily groundbreaking, but as we look over in the chat here, Christopher was saying, "Hey guys, great podcast. Thanks." But also, is it just me, or do I kind of prefer KD shooting more 2s than 3s? Understand, we've talked about this before, that Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving are very comfortable going into the mid-range game. But now in this version of the offense, do you think can there be benefits on the side? If they're penetrating into the mid-range game, we think about the shooters being around them, or could that be one of those areas where you say, now remember, with Claxton and Ben Simmons out there, they don't have a lot of places to go that defenses won't be able to sag off of them. So the mid-range game may have to be a little more selective now than it would have been if you have a James Harden on the roster or just more shooters at some of those other positions.
Yeah, the way their game, right? The way their game is sort of predicated, especially in these sort of weaving actions, dribble handoff actions. They're still running sort of these a lot of double drags that they were running at least early in the game, where there's, two screeners coming. It's sort of staggered screens that are coming, and then trying to free up a guy either on the backside of those screens or just get someone into a mismatch. Those are going to end a lot of times in just mid-range shots also too, just because of the nature of where those guys are sort of going toward the basket a little bit more in KD and Kyrie. So I think, most players, I would say, Patty Mills took a long 2 tonight, and I wanted to puke, right? But
Yeah, that's fair.
But if it's a KD or Kyrie long 2, that's just kind of different. It falls into a different class. So I would think there's a very, those 2 guys, DeRozan. There's a really short list of guys that you feel okay with it, and I would always vote for the 3. Right. Yeah. Because it's one more point. And if it's one step back and one more point, that's the trade-off and percentage.
We all know the classic toe on the line scenario, right? If it was one step back and one more point, something could have been a little bit different a couple of years ago.
Can I want to make a comment. So Kai just jumped into YouTube and said, keep the same energy when they're losing. Oh, okay. This energy actually has very little to do with, sorry. Yeah. You had that one queued up. This energy is not so much having to do with wins or losses. I felt fine with this at halftime. You know what I mean? Because it wasn't. I text you. I literally, this isn't and it wasn't a joke text. I texted you 4 minutes in. I said, I'm good. This team is going to be fine this season. And that's that. And by the way, I don't know why I'm getting amped up about this, Kai, but Doug and I always have the same approach when we talk about breaking this team down. It's about the big picture. It's about the long-term view. No single game is going to tell us that they're going to be a championship team, the same way that the first 2 preseason games were not, where we said, well, that's it. They better get ready to blow this thing up at the trade deadline because it's not going to work and Claxton can't play with Simmons, etc. So I understand what you're saying, man. Listen, we pretty much bring the same energy, which is breaking down this team and seeing where they can be successful. Tonight was a good example of a lot of areas that they can consistently be successful against good teams in this league. Yeah, for sure. Sorry, I skipped over. You had another comment.
Yeah.
That you had up there.
Let's get to Al, because Al's a frequent flyer with us as well. Are we happy with this squad, or do we need a stretch 5? Can Claxton and Simmons and Day'Ron exist as the Brick Brothers? Listen, the one thing I'll say is 2 for 6 at the line for Nicholas Claxton. Felt pretty good about that. Day'Ron Sharpe had 5 steals in this game. That's the kind of stat that you love to see. Just a freak beneficiary of everybody else's hard work and effort. But I actually thought Day'Ron, so one of the things we didn't get to in this one was talking about how Claxton looks very fluid. He started to at the back end of last year, working in transition. He took a half-court bounce pass on the move from Ben Simmons and went to the bucket and finished. I also thought that Day'Ron Sharpe with Kevin Durant at certain points ran the floor really well, took the drop-off passes, and finished around the rim. Is it always going to be perfect? No. Are there versions where the closing five lineup is not going to include two of these players? Maybe. But again, how many teams have the perfect iteration where they can be successful at both ends of the floor with consistency? I think it'll come. One of the things I'll bring up to, I'll ask you, Doug, too. I thought those guys got to the line and combined 10 times, Simmons and Claxton. Do they need to make their free throws? Yes, they do. You know what the other benefit is? Foul trouble for the other team. Those fouls still count. So as you work your way through a game and Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving and the scorers go towards the basket, now they're getting into the penalties sooner and they're able to get the free throw line where they can have higher success. So there is a cumulative impact of those things too.
I feel bad. Someone actually made this point in YouTube the other day, and I've quoted it now twice, and I'll go back and find this now when I'm done talking. I'll go find it because someone did make this point about the pressure that Simmons can apply, where just getting other team in foul trouble by the rim is going to have another ancillary benefit, which is something I hadn't really thought about too much, but it's 100% correct that like fouls, even if you're missing foul shots, which is not great. I mean, there is this other thing where if you're getting other teams, core players into sort of foul trouble, or you're getting into the bonus for later for Katie and Kyrie when they get fouled, who are completely automatic at the line, like and if Simmons, as long as he can feel comfortable about, taking contact, there will be some games where we are definitely going to have podcasts where we are going to be shaking our head because they lost by the margin of free throw misses, for sure. Like that's just going to happen. It might happen more than we're comfortable with, but we saw it last year with Claxton. Like it's not completely cured for sure. And there's just going to be games where they lose by 5 and these guys miss 7 free throws. Like that's just going to be, and
not that I'll be able to dismiss it, and it will be frustrating, but I guarantee you that for every one of those games, we'll have games where we say the defensive effort of Ben Simmons, his impact on that end of the floor is what saved you 2, 3, 4, right? Whatever it may be. And that's what I mean about in the overall, I think it ends up balancing out. The question will really become in late game sequences, in big games and playoff games, how will they navigate that? But that's an 82 games from now problem that I think they can figure out. And we don't know. Is Ben Simmons going to be a 70%, 75% free throw shooter? I tend to doubt it. But if he gets close enough to a respectable number where you take away a little bit of that, yeah, sure, we'll just put him on the line with consistency, then that's more than enough. And Claxton has to be able to prove that as well.
And one thing about Sharpe, I think what we saw tonight from Day'Ron is that he might actually just be matchup dependent because he didn't play. Yeah. He couldn't get off the bench in the second game when they played Miami, who is starting Bam at the 5 and is not really going big after him. Like they're playing Jovic after like him as like a big and you're at 7. But tonight where it's Lopez and Giannis, he was in the first rotation. Like he was he was in the first group that came off the bench with Patty Mills. So I think what you're going to see with Day'Ron, if the preseason games are any indication here, is that it's just going to be matchup dependent. Probably games where they play the Bucks or they play the Sixers or teams that just trend on the bigger side. I think you're going to see Sharpe. And teams that are trend smaller, which are a lot of them, he's not going to play as much. So I think that's my prediction now after watching these 2 games about what's going to happen with him is that it's just going to kind of depend on the game. And that's clearly there's kind of some role for him here, but maybe we'll talk about this on tomorrow's podcast because this probably feels like a podcast, another, formal podcast question. But that's my guess after watching what they did tonight.
Well, I have a couple more questions here. We're going to get to Javon, one of our... God, I love Javon. You know why? Because he always says, smash that like button. I always appreciate when someone says, smash the like button. But T over here, do you believe Kessler will have a role on this team? And in my opinion, at this moment, he is the weakest link. Yeah, we talked about him a little bit before. He essentially is buried on the bench right now. It's just there's plenty of players that serve the function that he, in theory, can develop into that are ahead of him on this. By the way, Ben Simmons being on this team actually diminishes a lot of what you think Kessler Edwards' value might be on the defensive end. And then when you talk about adding in a guy, we'll cover him at some point, but Yuta Watanabe has shown enough already in this preseason to say the consistency and the reliability there is there. The size is there. The athleticism is there. Right now, Kessler, to me, his biggest drag is going to be that he can't get himself to a place where you feel comfortable for him to be able to be fluid and consistent on both ends of the floor. That would be my stance on him right now. By the way, I'm a massive Kessler fan, but we said this going back to last year. A lot of young guys played a lot more than they anticipated last season, so it's okay for them to continue to develop. We'll have to talk about, obviously, Cam at some point as well, too. Last one for Javon. Appreciate you as always, sir. What do we got here? He was aggressive. This is a question. It's the statement. He was aggressive, got more drives to the rim, great steps, proud of the drop yet, put his shoulder down there, back to the basket. Yeah. You know what? And some of those things too, we can close out on this, I think, Doug. I liked the fact that we saw, why don't you take over this response about some of his moves on the offensive end while I get rid of some negative comments here on the feed, or possibly just promote the fact that they're there.
That was a nice call up for something that probably should have been there. Yeah, so Simmons actually kind of pulled out a few different things tonight that we hadn't seen. Like, he had at least 2 slip passes. One was in when he got fully going downhill to the basket, and it was a slip pass with his left hand, like fully in stride, I believe, to Claxton, who was crashing the board or kind of flying next to him in the rim. I think we saw that. We saw again many times where if he's going to get out in the open floor. They actually had a couple times where like their aggressiveness, even in transition, got the best of them. Like, they had a couple of missed passes this way where they tried to thread it all together. Or just 4 people to touch the ball instead of 3 or something like that, where it actually didn't all come together in the end. But Simmons, it was clear that I think from tonight, what he was probably getting more of a sense of was where other players were supposed to be on the court when he got into like different sets. Like, it was clear, like that's why we saw the dribble get picked up a lot less. That's why we saw the offense really not bogged down at all. I think he just kind of felt more comfortable with whatever they were running. Like, he was clear about what was going to be running. And again, I just a reminder here, like, this isn't just some random, like, this isn't like OKC's like second best 5 guys. This is like 3 of the better defenders, 2 of the best defenders in the league in Giannis and Drew. And then Lopez, who's an excellent defender. George Hill, completely undersized. Bobby Portis is kind of a negative. But like, in general, this is like, 3 of the 5 guys that started for this team are excellent defenders. Excellent. And Giannis might be the best. Giannis is probably the best defender in basketball, like outside of maybe Gobert or something like that. But like, and maybe he just is the best defender. So you have like 2 top 5 defenders or something like that in Giannis and Drew. So this wasn't like they were just playing just scrubs and getting into some of this stuff. To have the offense not stagnate against this group is another thing. Like, I think that is worth noting, right? That it was just that this is and a group that's played a lot of minutes together. Like, that Bucks team has played a ton together.
It's like playing against the Heat, playing against whatever the Raptors. There's so many teams that have played for several years now together that when you achieve
a ton last year, George Hill played not tons of minutes. He was kind of hurt a lot of times, but like the core group of Giannis, Drew, and Brooke, like they've played a ton of minutes together. And so, I know they haven't played a ton in the preseason, but it's not like this is just some group that's coming together. Who gets not Yuta Watanabe, baby. Come on.
That's right. You're not getting that guy off this team. Markieff Morris even had a decent game for himself here in this one. I think that's a good one maybe for our Friday episode as well. Just where's the 15-man lineup? Who's going down to the G League? Alondes Williams came in here on the back end of this one, and the other cast of crews. DDJ was in there as well. So we can kind of cut off where it looks. Honestly, I mean, I don't think I'm going to be too shocked about it. I would say that whether or not Markieff Morris is deserving of being on this roster, little secret here. I think he's going to make it. I think Yuta makes it. I think you've kind of seen what is the core and who is the finite group of younger players that are going to be on this roster going into the regular season. Everybody else is going to be call-ups 2 ways, and see what happens injury-wise.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to get out of here. Would you want to make a prediction, or we'll just, we'll do this on another podcast. I think I really appreciate, Deload, and thanks so much for the nice words. Obviously, I think we read some of these names, Claude, JJ. I'm trying to skip over some of these Sixers people that are getting here, but
you get no love from us inside of this.
Greg Abdul, Al Mack. Everyone here, Gerard. I'm probably going to miss them. Really appreciate it. We're going to jump out of here too. Got to get this podcast posted. Got to do a couple of dots and T's, cross some I's, as you know.
Blur out some things.
Everyone clip out some things that were spamming the chat here. Really appreciate everyone that jumped into YouTube, everyone that hung around. I thought we see some of this die off here as we stopped, but no, people stuck in. Really, really appreciate it.
I love this, man.
As a reminder, we'll do this every game, every weekday live game, and maybe some weekends. So just to come at you live after games, because we think there's a huge benefit, and it's just super fun. So really appreciate everyone that jumped in here. We're going to jump off now. Everyone have a good night.
Yeah, have a good night. It's a different way to end the podcast. I'm confused.
Yeah,
Have a
it's
good
weird.
night, guys.